They called the boy Monster because of his facial paralysis. But that day, when the millionaire father went to pick him up from school, he saw something that stopped time. His new nanny, a simple woman, facing the bullying of the classmates alone, and what he did seconds later made everyone hold their breath. The white gate of the seaside mansion groaned under the force of the wind, a sharp, lonely sound that seemed to echo the lament of the house itself. Inside, Arthur Sterling moved like a ghost between marble columns and arching windows that opened onto a grey, indifferent sea. Every object, every velvet armchair and every Persian rug seemed to hold the laughter of Helena, his late wife, and the silence she left behind was a suffocating presence. The fortune he'd amassed, a vast portfolio of stocks and bonds, couldn't buy back a single second of that time. He was a renowned architect, a man who erected award-winning skyscrapers, structures of steel and glass acclaimed by the world. But inside his own home, he felt unable to rebuild the foundations of his life. Work had become a refuge, a succession of cold, impersonal projects where he could hide from the pain. But the pain lived there, upstairs, in the closed-door bedroom where his 5-year-old son, Leo, lived in seclusion. Diagnosed with autism shortly before Helena's passing, the boy had withdrawn completely. He hadn't left his room in months. Not even the most insistent son could convince him to look out the window. Arthur had tried everything, the best specialists, the most modern therapies, but the little boy remained a silent enigma. It was the last doctor, a man with tired eyes and a gentle voice, who suggested something different, almost trivial, a companion, someone who wouldn't try to fix him, but would simply be there. And that was why, on that pale blue morning, an unexpected figure passed through the gate. Her name was Clara. She didn't bring a brilliant resume filled with degrees and references from wealthy families. She came from a modest neighborhood, where life taught you to survive on little and celebrate the small victories. Her attire, a light floral sundress, clashed with the stark luxury of the environment. Yet her gaze carried a sweet firmness, the serenity of someone who had known pain up close but refused to let it define her path. Their meeting in the immense living room was a collision of worlds. He, contained in his perfectly tailored linen suit, spoke of rules, schedules, and non-disclosure agreements. He mentioned the complexity of his business dealings and the need for absolute discretion. She, with her hands resting calmly in her lap, listened with patience. And when he finished, she spoke of flowers, of the sound of birds, and of the importance of feeling the earth beneath one's feet. Arthur would have dismissed her on the spot, were it not for the desperation gnawing at him. Hiring her was an act of surrender, an unlikely gamble for a man accustomed to calculating every investment. He watched her for a long moment, the light from the window tracing her serene face, and saw something he hadn't expected, an absence of fear. She didn't seem intimidated by his wealth, nor by the sorrow that hung in the air. It was this quiet courage that made him decide. "The rules are clear," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. "Leo's room is your primary workspace. I don't want you to force him into anything. Just be there." Clara nodded, a discreet smile touching her lips. "I understand. Mr. Sterling, sometimes just being present is the only language left." He hired her at the doctor's urging, on an impulse his logical mind couldn't comprehend, never imagining that fate, in its subtle and relentless way, had just walked through the front door. As he closed his office door, the click of the lock echoed, strangely loud, down the empty hall. For the first time in a long time, a new and unsettling feeling washed over him. Uncertainty. He had just handed the key to his son's silent world to a complete stranger, a woman who spoke of gardens in a house where all the flowers had died. Clara's first days in the mansion were an exercise in patience and observation. The house, with its high ceilings and silent corridors, felt like a museum to a life that no longer existed. The housekeeper, a middle-aged woman named Elvira with a severe bun and a gaze that passed judgment without a word, made it clear from the first moment that Clara was an intruder. Elvira had served the Sterling family for over 2 decades, and her loyalty to Helena's memory was fierce and unyielding. "Mrs. Sterling appreciated order and silence," she said, during a quick, cold tour of the house. "Anything out of place disturbed her, I hope you understand." It was a veiled warning, a constant reminder that Clara was treading on sacred, fragile ground. Arthur, for his part, reinforced this distance with a calculated indifference. He left for his office before dawn and returned late at night, communicating with Clara only through short, formal notes left on the mahogany desk. They were instructions about Leo's routine, nothing more. He submerged himself in his business, in conference calls about new investments and the fluctuations of his stock portfolio. A universe of numbers and projections that shielded him from the emotional chaos of his own home. He watched her on the security cameras, a concession he'd made to his own anxiety, and saw Clara sitting in the hallway, just outside Leo's bedroom door. She didn't try to enter. She would just sit on the floor, a book in her lap, and read in a low voice or hum soft melodies. She was a constant, but not invasive, presence. Inside the room, Leo listened. The sound traveled through the solid wood of the door, a gentle vibration in the silence that enveloped him. He didn't understand the words, but the cadence of that voice was like a distant lullaby, something that soothed him without his knowing why. It was on a salt-breezed afternoon that Clara found the garden, hidden behind a wing of the house that seemed uninhabited, enclosed by an ivy-covered wall and a rusted iron gate. The place was the very picture of desolation. Weeds choked what had once been a rose bed, and a small stone bench was covered in moss. It was a place forgotten by time. Yet, amid the neglect, something caught her eye. Near the bench, small wildflowers of a stubborn blue pushed through the cracks between the stones. They were a sign of life, a silent promise that beauty could still exist here. She felt an immediate connection to the space. She saw in it not ruin, but the possibility of rebirth. As she gently touched one of the petals, Elvira's harsh voice startled her. This was Mrs. Helena's garden. No one has come in here since she was gone. The housekeeper stared at her with crossed arms, disapproval etched on her face. "Mr. Sterling has forbidden any changes. You would do well to stay away." Clara simply nodded, but the seed of an idea had already been planted in her heart. That night, she couldn't sleep. The abandoned garden and the silent boy seemed like 2 parts of the same story, both waiting for someone with the courage to bring them back into the light. The risk of being fired was high, and losing this job would mean jeopardizing her family's livelihood. But something inside her said that backing down was not an option. The next morning, while the house was still asleep, Clara found a small shed at the back of the property. Inside, dusty and forgotten, were Helena's gardening tools. She picked up a small hand trowel, the cold metal against her skin. The weight of the object in her hand was the weight of a decision. With her heart pounding, she walked toward the rusted gate, the image of the blue flowers and Leo's distant eyes in her mind. She didn't know if she was doing the right thing, but she knew she couldn't keep watching the silence win. The groan of the iron gate was a profanity in the morning silence. Clara pushed it slowly, feeling the rough, rusted metal under her fingers. Every inch the gate yielded felt like an act of rebellion, a deliberate breaking of the house's unspoken rules. She expected, at any moment, for Elvira's cutting voice or Arthur's imposing presence to stop her, but nothing happened. The garden received her with its scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. With the small trowel in hand, she started with the simplest task, pulling the weeds that choked the small blue flowers. The work was slow, methodical, Every root she pulled from the earth felt like removing a small piece of the sorrow accumulated in that place. She didn't think about the risk, only about the soil that needed to breathe, the flowers that needed light. It was the sound of the trowel scraping against a stone that gave her away. "What do you think you're doing?" Elvira's voice came from behind her, laced with a restrained fury. The housekeeper stood at the entrance to the garden, her face a mask of indignation. "I told you this place was forbidden. I'm informing Mr. Sterling immediately." Clara stood, wiping the dirt from her hands on her dress. She didn't apologize. She just looked at Elvira with the same serenity she had used to face Arthur. "This place isn't dead," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It's only sleeping." The answer disarmed Elvira for a second. The housekeeper had expected a plea, an excuse, not this quiet conviction. The contempt in her eyes, however, deepened. To Elvira, this was a direct assault on Helena's memory, a desecration of her former mistress's sanctuary. "You won't be here for long," Elvira hissed, before turning and marching back to the house, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Clara knew her time there might be short, but she didn't stop. In the days that followed, she established a routine. In the mornings, she sat outside Leo's room, reading or singing softly. In the afternoons, she went to the garden. She always left the gate ajar, a silent invitation. Upstairs, Leo began to notice the change. The sound of Clara's voice now mingled with other noises. The scrape of a tool in the dirt, the rustle of leaves, the soft sound of water from a watering can. They were living, organic sounds that broke the oppressive monotony of his room. One day, curiosity overcame fear. He slid off the bed and, for the first time in months, approached the window. From a distance, he watched the woman in the floral dress. He saw her small, nimble hands loosening the soil, planting seeds she took from small, colorful packets. He didn't understand what she was doing. But the sight of the colors, the vibrant yellow of one packet, the red of another, seemed to speak a language he understood. He watched her for days, a secret spectator to a silent transformation. The garden, once a tangle of gray and dark green, began to gain points of color. She planted seedlings of daisies, carnations, and what looked like sunflowers. One afternoon, as the sun gilded the horizon, she pushed a small wooden stake into the earth and hung from it a wind chime made of bamboo. The sound it made in the breeze was gentle, a delicate melody that didn't break the silence, but adorned it. For Leo, locked in his room, that sound was a revelation. It wasn't sharp like the groaning gate, nor muffled like the adults' voices. It was a round, predictable sound, a caress in the air. That afternoon, the sound called to him more strongly than any word ever had. He opened his bedroom door, a gesture he hadn't made on his own in nearly a year. His bare feet touched the soft carpet of the hallway, and he moved with the caution of a wild animal exploring unknown territory. The house was silent, except for the distant tinkling of the wind chime. He followed the sound, descending the marble staircase step by step, one hand always touching the cool wall, as if seeking security from it. He reached the back door, which led to the garden, and stopped. The sunlight made him blink. Outside, Clara had her back to him, kneeling before a newly formed flower bed. She didn't seem to have noticed his presence. Leo stood there, on the threshold, one foot in the shadow of the house, the other touching the damp grass. It was the first time he had felt the texture of grass in months. He watched her hands, covered in dirt, as they planted a small seedling with infinite delicacy. Clara sensed his presence before she saw him. A subtle shift in the air, a deeper silence behind her. Her instinct, sharpened by years of care and empathy, told her not to turn, not to make any sudden movement that might break the spell of that fragile moment. She continued her work with slow, predictable gestures, giving the boy the time and space he needed. After a few minutes, She picked up another seedling from a small crate beside her. It was a flower with velvety petals of an intense purple. Without turning toward him, she extended her arm back, leaving the seedling suspended in the air, halfway between them. It was a mute invitation, an offer without the pressure of a request. Leo looked at the flower. The color was mesmerizing. He took one step, then another. His feet sank slightly into the soft earth. He approached slowly, his eyes fixed on the small plant. His hand rose, hesitant. He didn't take the seedling. He just touched one of the petals with the tip of his index finger. The touch was so light, it felt like a butterfly landing. In that instant, a smile of pure tenderness lit up Clara's face. It was the first victory, small but monumental. From the kitchen window, Elvira watched the scene, a teacup paused halfway to her lips. The shock paralyzed her thoughts. It was impossible. Years of specialists, of expensive treatments that consumed a portion of the vast, sterling fortune, had failed to achieve what this simple woman had with a handful of dirt and a wind chime. A mixture of astonishment and a bitter resentment formed in her chest. This changed everything. Her face unreadable. She stepped away from the window and picked up the cell phone from the counter. Her fingers hovered over the screen, the decision weighing more than any secret she had ever kept in that house. The news reached Arthur Sterling like a distant, incomprehensible noise in the middle of a tense meeting about his stock market fluctuations. Elvira didn't call. She sent a single photo to his phone. The image, captured from a distance and slightly blurry, showed Leo's silhouette at the entrance to the garden, the light of the setting sun enveloping his small figure. There was no context, just the raw, undeniable image. His son was out of his room. Arthur ended the video call abruptly, leaving his financial advisors in stunned silence on the other side of the screen, talking about interest rates and dividends to a boss who was no longer listening. He drove home with an urgency he hadn't felt in years, his heart hammering against his ribs, a mixture of hope and panic churning in his chest. The fortune he managed with such precision suddenly seemed insignificant in the face of that small image. What did it mean? He stopped the car in front of the mansion and entered without a sound. The house was quiet as always, but the air felt different, less heavy. He headed for the garden, the path now familiar, and then he saw it. The scene was far more impactful in person than in the photograph. Leo was kneeling on the grass, no longer on the threshold, but in the middle of the renewed garden. His small hands, once always immaculately clean, were covered in dirt. He was touching the petals of a daisy with deep concentration, his head tilted as if listening to a secret. A few feet away, Clara was watering a flower bed, moving with a tranquility that seemed to orchestrate the peace of the moment. Time stopped for Arthur. The image of his son, out of his cocoon, smiling, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile, but unquestionably a smile, hit him with the force of a wave. For a second, he felt his own lips curve in response, a forgotten reflex of joy. But the emotion was so overwhelming, so foreign after so long, that it frightened him. Fear came next, disguised as anger and control. This was his role, that of protector, and he had failed. This woman, a stranger, had succeeded where he had failed, and it made him feel vulnerable. "What is going on here?" His voice cut through the air, harsher than he intended. Leo flinched at the sound of his father's voice, the smile instantly vanishing. He scrambled to his feet and ran, not to his room, but behind Clara, clinging to the fabric of her dress. The gesture was a direct blow to Arthur's heart. Clara turned slowly, her face serene, but her eyes filled with a silent concern. He was just feeling the earth, Mr. Sterling. The simplicity of the explanation irritated him even more. "Take him inside and get him cleaned up right now," he ordered a maid who had appeared. drawn by the voices. Then he turned to Clara, his jaw tight. "We had rules. The doctor said not to force him, not to break his routine." "I didn't force him. The garden called to him," she replied, her voice low but unwavering. Her calmness unsettled him. It was like trying to argue with the sea breeze. He saw her as a threat to his control, to the fragile order he had built to survive. That night, Arthur couldn't sleep. Sitting in his office, surrounded by architectural plans that had earned him millions of dollars and worldwide recognition, he felt like a failure. Through the window, he could see the garden illuminated by the moonlight, and then he heard it. A sound he hadn't heard in over a year. A laugh. It came from Leo's room. It wasn't loud, it was a soft sound, almost a murmur of joy. Clara must have been in there with him. That sound, which should have brought him peace, filled him with a torturous conflict. He wanted to feel happy, but he felt replaced. His son's laughter, prompted by someone else, was living proof of his own absence. He stood up and went to Leo's door. He hesitated, his hand on the doorknob. The fear of opening that door and seeing a happiness he wasn't part of was paralyzing. The sound of Leo's laughter, filtered through the wooden door, was both a balm and a torment to Arthur. He stood there, motionless in the dark hallway, his hand hovering inches from the cold brass doorknob. To open that door would mean confronting his own failure, admitting that someone else had found the path to his son's heart while he hid behind an empire of assets and deals. To retreat, however, would be to surrender to the darkness that had been consuming him since Helena's passing. With a sigh that carried the weight of years of contained grief, he finally touched the knob. He turned it with infinite slowness and pushed the door just enough to create a crack. The scene that revealed itself was devastatingly simple. Clara was sitting on the floor beside Leo's bed. She wasn't doing anything grand. In her hands, she held a small sea urchin shell, likely found on one of her walks along the beach. With her finger, she gently traced the contours of the shell, and Leo, sitting beside her, mimicked the gesture in the air with his own small hand, his eyes shining with a serene curiosity. The laughter Arthur had heard wasn't from some boisterous game, but from a moment of pure, quiet connection. Clara was whispering something about sea stars and how each of the urchin's spines was a tiny warrior protecting a soft heart. It was a poetic, childlike language that somehow broke through Leo's barrier of silence. Arthur felt a lump form in his throat. He, who mastered the complex language of capital markets and cryptocurrency, felt like an illiterate in the face of this primary effective communication. He closed the door without a sound, his heart heavy with a mixture of gratitude and jealousy. In the weeks that followed, the transformation of the house was undeniable. The garden, under Clara's care, became a mirror of the internal change that was occurring. Every flower that bloomed seemed to return color to the mansion's faded walls. The smell of wet earth and jasmine filled the mornings, and the songs of birds, drawn by the new life, filled the silence. Clara, without realizing or planning it, altered the rhythm of the routine. She taught Leo to recognize different birds by their song, to feel the texture of wet sand between his fingers, and to hear the sound of rain not as a frightening noise, but as nature's lullaby. Arthur began to watch them from a distance, from his office window. He saw his son take his first hesitant steps on the grass, saw Clara teach him how to water a sunflower seedling, saw the two of them sitting on the stone bench, just watching the clouds go by. There was something in their interaction that drew him in, a piece he desperately wanted but didn't feel worthy of. His resistance was fueled by guilt. He believed, in some dark corner of his mind, that allowing himself to feel joy again, to love again, would be a betrayal of Helena's memory. That garden had been hers, and seeing it flourish without her was painful. Clara, in turn, carried her own fears. She was growing attached to Leo with an intensity that frightened her. She knew her position was fragile, dependent on the mood of a man who barely looked her in the eye. Losing this job would mean not only losing the boy, but also the livelihood of her sick mother and teenage brother, whose college education she was funding. They were two hearts trapped for different reasons, hostages of their own pasts, orbiting around a little boy who was relearning how to live. The first real bridge between them was built by a storm. One night, the sky broke open in a fury of wind and rain. Thunder rattled the mansion's windows. Arthur was in his office, trying to focus on a report about the profitability of his investment funds, when the door burst open. Leo stood there, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. Arthur braced himself for the crying, for the panic that always accompanied storms. But the boy didn't run to him. He ran to the corner of the office where Clara, who had come to bring her employer a glass of water, was standing. Leo grabbed her hand and pulled, his small eyes pleading. The gesture broke something inside Arthur. His son, in his moment of greatest fear, hadn't sought him out. He had sought her. In that instant, he realized with terrifying clarity that Clara had become the link between him and his son, the emotional center of his home. And that terrified him, the fear of losing her, of her leaving and taking the light she had brought with her, manifested in the only way he knew: control. He had to push her away before the dependence became unbearable. Fear, like a weed, grew fast and silent in Arthur's heart. Leo's gesture during the storm had exposed a truth he was not prepared to accept. Clara was no longer just an employee. She had become the emotional pillar of his family, and pillars, he knew from his profession, could crumble, taking everything down with them. The idea that his son's fragile peace depended on a stranger was unbearable. He began to act with a deliberate coldness, convincing himself he was protecting both himself and Leo from future pain. His orders, once conveyed through notes, became more direct and impersonal. "Keep the activities restricted to the garden and his room," he told Clara one morning, without looking her in the eye, "and avoid unnecessary physical contact. Dr. Matthews recommended that Leo develop independence." It was a lie. Dr. Matthews had said the exact opposite, that touch and affection were essential. But Arthur used the doctor's name as a shield, an unquestionable authority to justify the distance he wanted to impose. Clara felt the change immediately. The atmosphere in the mansion, which had begun to warm, turned cold again. Arthur's glances were evasive, his words monosyllabic. She didn't understand what she had done wrong. The joy she had felt at seeing Leo's progress was now tinged with constant anxiety. She walked on eggshells, afraid that any misstep might break the thin ice beneath her. The garden, now vibrant and full of life, became her only refuge, a silent witness to the growing conflict. It was in this tense climate that Elvira found fertile ground for her malice. The jealousy she felt toward Clara, the way the nanny had won over not just the child, but also a space in the household dynamic that had once been her exclusive domain, ate at her from the inside. The housekeeper, who for years had been the guardian of Helena's memories and order, saw Clara as a usurper. She watched the interactions between the nanny and the boy, not with Arthur's wonder, but with a growing resentment. And where there was love, Elvira chose to see self-interest. One evening, when Arthur arrived later and more exhausted than usual, after a disastrous day on the stock market had shaken a part of his net worth, Elvira was waiting for him in the living room. She poured him a glass of scotch, her expression carefully arranged to look concerned. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice low and conspiratorial, "I don't wish to meddle, but I feel it's my duty, out of loyalty to Mrs. Helena and this family, to warn you." Arthur, too tired for arguments, simply looked at her, waiting for her to continue. "The nanny, Clara, I've been observing her behavior. She seems to be taking advantage of the boy's fragility to gain a foothold, to make herself indispensable." Every word was a drop of poison. She talks about her family's financial struggles, her sick mother. I get the impression she sees little Leo, and perhaps you, as an opportunity, a way to secure a comfortable future. The lie was planted with cruel skill, mixing half-truths with malicious insinuation. Arthur, wounded by the fear of being used, of his vast wealth making him a target for manipulation, found in Elvira's words the confirmation of his worst fears. It wasn't about Leo's well-being, it was about money. The idea disgusted him and, at the same time, relieved him. It was easier to believe in a vile motive than to accept the complexity of his own emotions. The next day, he summoned Clara to his office. The room, once a place of work, now felt like a courtroom. He stood behind his imposing mahogany desk, his face a closed fortress. "Your services are no longer required," he said, the words coming out dry, devoid of any emotion. Clara felt the floor disappear from beneath her feet. "What? But Leo, he's doing so well." "Financial and administrative matters," he interrupted, using terms from his corporate world to avoid the truth. "Your severance will be deposited into your account. Elvira will escort you to your quarters to pack your things. You have 1 hour." She looked at him, her eyes welling with tears, searching for an explanation, for a glimpse of humanity behind that mask of coldness. But he wouldn't meet her gaze. He kept his eyes fixed on a point somewhere above her head. Dismissed, with no right to explain herself, with no chance to say goodbye to the boy she had learned to love, Clara felt the weight of injustice crush her. The white gate of the mansion closed behind her with a final, definitive click. Inside, the house, which for a brief time had rediscovered color, plunged back into shadow. And upstairs, Leo, without understanding why, once again felt the bitter taste of silence. Clara's absence was like a vacuum that sucked all the air out of the mansion. The silence that fell was not the same as before, peaceful and melancholic. It was a heavy silence, charged with a palpable tension. The first to feel it was Leo. That afternoon, he waited for her in the garden. He sat on the stone bench, his little feet dangling, his eyes fixed on the gate where she always entered. But she didn't come. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the colors Clara had taught him to name. The bamboo wind chime tinkled softly in the breeze, but the melody, once comforting, now sounded lonely. Elvira tried to bring him inside, offering his favorite snack, but Leo didn't move. He remained there, a small statue of hope and confusion, until darkness swallowed the garden completely. In the days that followed, his regression was swift and devastating. Leo stopped leaving his room. He refused to eat. The rare words he had begun to babble, flower, blue, sun, vanished, swallowed again by mutism. The house, which had started to breathe, held its breath once more. Arthur tried to fill the void with his presence. He cancelled meetings, postponed business trips, and spent hours sitting in the hallway outside his son's room, just as Clara had done. But his presence didn't have the same effect. He was a shadow, a reminder of her absence. His mind, so skilled at deciphering complex cash flows and investment strategies, was incapable of cracking the code of his own son's pain. He felt powerless, a billionaire whose fortune couldn't buy the one thing that mattered, Leo's peace. Guilt began to eat at him. The decision to fire Clara, which had seemed so logical and protective, now revealed itself as a catastrophic mistake. Elvira's words, once so convincing, began to ring false in his memory. He watched the housekeeper, her flawless efficiency, her demonstrative loyalty, and for the first time, he saw a crack in her facade. There was a glint of triumph in her eyes whenever she mentioned the former nanny, a subtle pleasure in the reassertion of her authority in the house. The revelation came silently and devastatingly. One afternoon, while tidying the office he had barely used in recent days, Arthur found, fallen behind a bookshelf, a small notebook of Clara's. She must have forgotten it in the haste of her departure. He picked it up, thinking of throwing it away, but something stopped him. He sat in his leather chair and opened it. It wasn't a diary. It was notes about Leo, page after page, detailing her observations. Today, Leo looked at a yellow bird for 3 minutes. Does he like yellow? He dislikes the sound of the blender, but seems soothed by the sound of rain. Maybe an app with nature sounds. Geranium petal is velvety. He touched it 5 times. Soft textures. There were drawings of flowers, lists of birds, notes on the tides, and, on the last page, the draft of a letter. Dear Mom, things are going well here. The boy is an angel who forgot how to fly. But I think he's starting to remember. His father is a sad man. I think his wealth is a golden cage. But don't worry, the salary is good, and soon we'll be able to pay for your surgery and make sure Lucas finishes college. With love, C. Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. The letter was not from a gold digger, but from a devoted daughter and sister. The opportunity Elvira had mentioned wasn't about luxury or greed. It was about her family's survival and well-being. He had been deceived. Worse, he had allowed his own fears and prejudices to deceive him. At that moment, the office door opened and Leo walked in. He was pale, thinner. He said nothing. He just walked to his father, opened his small hand, and placed upon the mahogany desk a single, dried purple petal. The same flower he and Clara had planted together. It was an accusation, a question, and a plea, all in one mute gesture. Arthur looked from the petal to his son's face, and the armor he had built around his heart finally shattered. The pain of regret was sharp, physical. He knew it wasn't too late. It couldn't be. He grabbed his car keys, Clara's notebook still in his hand. "We're going to get her, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise." For the first time, it wasn't an order from a boss or a decision from a multimillionaire. It was a father's promise. The drive to Clara's neighborhood was like crossing a portal into another universe. Arthur, accustomed to the smooth asphalt of wide avenues and the imposing glass and steel facades of his world, now drove through narrow, winding streets where kids played ball in the street and neighbors chatted over garden fences. The air didn't smell of the sea, but of cake baking in a nearby oven and clean laundry drying in the sun. There was a pulsating, communal life here, a contrast so vivid with the silent coldness of his mansion that it left him disoriented. He found the address written on the back of Clara's notebook. It was a small house with a low wall and a simple iron gate, with colorful geraniums in pots decorating the entrance. The place radiated a care and warmth that money couldn't buy. He hesitated inside his car, the engine off, feeling like an intruder in his expensive suit and luxury vehicle. For the first time in his adult life, Arthur Sterling, the man whose deals influenced international markets, felt small and inadequate. He took a deep breath and got out of the car. Before he could reach the gate, a woman with grey hair and an easy smile, who was watering plants next door, approached him. "Can I help you, sir? Looking for someone?" "I'm looking for Clara," he said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "Oh, Clara. She's out back, tending to her garden. Go on in, she won't mind." The casualness of the invitation, the implicit trust, took him by surprise. In his world, gates were barriers, not invitations. He walked down the narrow side path of the house and came to a modest backyard. And there she was, kneeling in the dirt, wearing simple clothes and her hair in a loose bun. Clara was tending a small, makeshift garden in planters made of brightly painted old tires. She wasn't just planting. She was recreating life, beauty, in the small space she had. Hearing his approach, she turned. Her eyes widened in surprise, and the serenity on her face was replaced by a mask of caution. She stood, wiping the dirt from her hands, The reunion was tense, the air heavy with unspoken words. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice cold, devoid of the sweetness he had grown accustomed to hearing. I came to apologize," Arthur began, the words stumbling, clumsy. "I made a mistake. I was unfair." Clara crossed her arms, her body rigid. She didn't want to hear it. The humiliation of being dismissed without explanation, the pain of being torn away from Leo, was still too raw. "A mistake? You dismissed me as if I were a defective object. You didn't give me the right to say a word." "I know, and there's no excuse for it," he admitted, and the sincerity in his voice was undeniable. "I was misled by lies and by my own fears. I was wrong, Clara, deeply wrong." For the first time, he called her by her name, without the formality of Miss. He took a step forward, holding out the small notebook. "You forgot this." Her eyes filled with tears as she saw the notebook, the record of her hopes and her affection for Leo. She didn't take it. "It doesn't matter anymore." "It does matter," he insisted, his voice now laced with a desperate urgency. "Leo won't eat. He won't leave his room. He needs you, Clara. I need you to come back." She shook her head, the hurt still stronger than her compassion. I can't work for someone who doesn't trust me. I can't risk my heart again." He looked at her, seeing not just his son's nanny, but the strong, principled woman before him, and he knew an apology as an employer wouldn't be enough. He needed to speak as a man, as a father. "I'm not asking as your employer," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I'm begging as a father. He's holding a petal from the flower you two planted together, and he won't let it go for anything. Please, Clara, not for me, for him." The mention of the petal was what broke her. The image of the small, pale, sad boy clinging to that last link between them was stronger than her wounded pride. The tears she had been holding back finally rolled down her face. She still hesitated, the fear of being hurt again, fighting against the love she felt for Leo. But as she looked at Arthur's face, she didn't see the arrogant millionaire who had fired her. She saw a desperate father, a man who, perhaps for the first time, was stripped of his armor. And in that glimpse of vulnerability, she found the strength to forgive. The return to the mansion was silent, charged with a delicate uncertainty. Clara sat in the passenger seat of the luxury car, the smell of new leather contrasting with the scent of earth on her clothes. She stared out the window, watching the scenery transform, the modest houses giving way to tree-lined avenues. She felt as if she were returning from exile, but the territory she was returning to was still strange and potentially hostile. Arthur drove with intense concentration, his hands firm on the wheel. He didn't try to fill the silence with trivial conversation. He understood that trust, once broken, isn't rebuilt with words, but with actions. His only concern at that moment was the reunion to come. As they passed through the white gate, Elvira was at the entrance, waiting to receive her employer. Her face, always a mask of composure, crumbled in shock and disbelief upon seeing Clara get out of the car. A flash of fury crossed her eyes, followed by a cold fear. She knew her lie had been discovered. Arthur walked past her without a word, a chilling contempt in his gaze that was more devastating than any reprimand. He led Clara directly to the staircase. "He's in his room," he said in a low voice. "He hasn't left since you—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Clara climbed the stairs, each step an echo of her pounding heart. She stopped in front of Leo's closed door, the same spot where she had spent so many hours singing and reading. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside her, and knocked lightly. There was no answer. She turned the knob slowly and went in. The room was dim, the curtains drawn against the sunlight. Leo was sitting on the floor, huddled in a corner, his back to the door. He was paler, and an untouched tray of food rested beside him. Clara's heart ached. "Leo!" she called softly. His little head lifted. He turned slowly, and his eyes, once dull and distant, widened. For a moment, he seemed not to believe it, as if she were an apparition. Then, a tremor ran through his small body. He stood up and, with surprising speed, ran to her, hugging her legs with a desperate force. He didn't cry. He just clung to her, his small face buried in her dress, like a castaway clinging to a piece of driftwood. Clara knelt, wrapping him in her arms, inhaling the scent of his hair. The tears she had held back in the garden now flowed freely, tears of relief, of joy, and of a deep sorrow for having left him. "I'm here, my little one," she whispered. "I'm here." From the doorway, Arthur watched the scene, an invisible spectator to that sacred reunion. He felt a wave of gratitude so intense it made him dizzy, but at the same time, he felt like a stranger, looking in on a circle of love he wasn't part of. He backed away silently, leaving them alone. Clara's decision to stay was clear, but she set a silent condition. She would stay for Leo, not for him. In the following days, the routine resumed, but with a different dynamic. The rebuilding was slow, brick by brick. Clara dedicated herself to Leo, bringing him back into the light with the same patience as before. The garden once again became the center of their activities, a sanctuary of healing for the boy. Arthur, for his part, began to participate. Discreetly at first, he would appear in the garden, pretending to read reports on his tablet, but his eyes were always on them. One day, he picked up a small watering can and, without a word, began to water the roses, imitating what he saw Clara do. On another afternoon, he sat on the stone bench while Clara and Leo built a small castle of pebbles. He didn't interfere, just observed, learning from her the language of simple gestures, the value of a gentle routine, the power of touch, the beauty of improvisation. He was learning to be a father in a way he had never known before. One afternoon, as the sun painted the sky, the three of them were in the garden. Clara was singing a song about a paper boat, and Leo, sitting on the grass, was trying to fold a leaf. He was concentrating, his little tongue sticking out, frustration growing with each wrong fold. Suddenly, he looked at the small purple flower he had planted himself, now lush and strong. He pointed to it and, with a clarity that made the world stop, uttered a single word: Clara. It wasn't her name, it was the name he had given the flower, but it was enough. The sound of that word, the first he had spoken in weeks, the first he had directed at her, made them all freeze. Clara brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes shining. Arthur, who was a few feet away, felt as if he'd been struck by pure emotion. He looked at his son, then at Clara, and saw the invisible bond that united them, a bond forged in earth, patience and affection. And for the first time, he didn't feel jealousy. He felt only an overwhelming gratitude and the hope that perhaps there was still a place for him in that circle of light. The words spoken by Leo, small and sweet, hung in the garden air like the final note of a long-awaited song. For Clara, it was the confirmation of everything she had fought for, the proof that the silent love she had planted had finally bloomed. For Arthur, it was an epiphany. The sound of his son's voice, uttering a name that was not his own, didn't wound him as he had feared. Instead, it opened a door inside him, a door to humility. He finally understood that love was not an asset to be owned, an exclusive property. It was a force that expanded, and Clara's connection with Leo didn't diminish his role as a father. On the contrary, it enriched it, taught him. From that day on, the dynamic in the mansion deepened. Arthur abandoned the pretense of being a distant observer. He began to get actively involved, no longer as a discreet helper, but as a genuine participant. He asked Clara to teach him. "How do you know which flower needs more sun?" he would ask, sincere curiosity in his voice. "How do you know when he needs silence and when he needs a song?" And Clara, stripped of any resentment, shared her intuitive knowledge. "You don't know with your head," she would explain, as she showed him how to loosen the soil without hurting the roots. You feel it. It's like listening to music that has no sound. He began to learn that music. He started leaving his office earlier, trading meetings about his treasury investments for time in the garden. He discovered the simple joy of feeling the dirt under his fingernails, the smell of grass after the rain, the sound of Leo's laughter when a ladybug landed on his finger. He was discovering a different kind of wealth, one that couldn't be measured in dollars, but in moments of pure connection. Elvira, the housekeeper, became a shadow in her own house. Arthur didn't fire her, a decision Clara didn't understand at first. Instead, he treated her with a polite, cutting indifference that was, in many ways, a worse punishment than dismissal. He removed her from all responsibilities related to Leo, confining her to the mansion's administrative tasks. She was a deposed queen, forced to watch the flourishing of the new kingdom she herself, through her malice, had helped to create. One evening, as Clara was putting Leo to bed, the boy, already sleepy, held her hand. "Stay," he whispered, the second word she had heard him say clearly. "I'll stay, my love, I'll always stay," she replied, her heart overflowing. Later, she found Arthur on the veranda, looking out at the night sea. The lights of ships on the horizon looked like fallen stars. The air was cool, and a comfortable silence settled between them. "He asked me to stay," Clara said, more to herself than to him. Arthur turned to her, his face illuminated by the soft light coming from inside the house. There was a vulnerability in his eyes she had never seen before. "I'm asking you too," he said, his voice little more than a whisper. "Not as Leo's father, but as Arthur. Stay, Clara." The simplicity of the request disarmed her. There were no promises, no grand declarations. There was only the confession of a need, the acknowledgement that her presence had become essential not just for the child, but for the man as well. She didn't answer with words. She just nodded, a small gesture that sealed a new beginning. The weeks turned into months. Autumn arrived, painting the leaves of some of the garden trees in shades of gold and copper. Leo blossomed. He began to talk more, forming short sentences, asking questions about the world around him. His curiosity was infinite. He and Arthur developed their own rituals, making little boats out of leaves and watching them sail in the garden fountain or lying on the grass at night to count the stars. Clara was the sun, around which their two worlds now revolved. But as happiness took root, a new restlessness began to grow in her heart. She had come to help a child heal, and her mission was nearly complete. Leo now had his father back, a present and loving father. The house no longer needed a healer. She began to wonder what her place was. After all, was she the nanny, a friend, something more? The undefined nature of her role left her in an emotional limbo. She loved this new family, but she didn't know if she truly belonged to it, and the fear that this magical interlude could end at any moment, leaving her heartbroken once again, was a constant shadow on the horizon of her happy days. Happiness, Clara discovered, had its own melody. It was the sound of Leo's laughter echoing through the garden as he chased a butterfly, the deep timbre of Arthur's voice reading a bedtime story, the gentle tinkling of the wind chime mixed with birdsong. The mansion, once a tomb of silence, now pulsed with the music of life. On a Saturday afternoon, the autumn sun cast a golden light over the grass, and the three of them were together, building a small birdhouse from twigs and dried leaves. Arthur, the world-renowned architect whose designs defined the skylines of entire cities, was sitting cross-legged on the ground, completely focused on tying a stick with a piece of string. Following Leo's instructions, he was laughing, a genuine, free sound that Clara held in her heart like a treasure. Watching them, a father and son completely reconnected, a deep love and a sharp pain mingled inside her. She had been the bridge that united them, but now that they had crossed to the other side, what was her purpose? She felt like the wooden framework used to build a stone arch, essential for the construction, but removed once the structure is strong enough to support itself. That night, the decision solidified in her soul. Painful and inevitable. She had to leave. To stay would be to prolong an uncertainty that was beginning to hurt her. To content herself with being a spectator to the happiness she had helped create. Her heart was already too involved to accept being just the nanny. She found Arthur in his office. He wasn't analyzing the profitability of his stocks or the cash flow of his businesses. On his desk, instead of financial charts, was a large sheet of paper with a sketch of a treehouse full of playful details that he planned to build for Leo in the old oak tree in the garden. He looked up as she entered, a smile lighting his face. "Clara, look at this. I thought we could put a small telescope in the top window so he can see the stars you taught him to name." His enthusiasm, his plans for a future that naturally included her, made what she had to say even harder. "Arthur, we need to talk," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. He caught the seriousness in her tone, and his smile vanished. "Is something wrong? My work here is done," she said, the words coming out in a rush of air. "Leo is well. He's happy. He has you. You don't need me anymore." Arthur stared at her, confusion slowly giving way to panic. He stood, rounding the desk to stand in front of her. His first reaction was that of the businessman, the multi-millionaire used to solving problems with capital. "Is this about money? I can double your salary, triple it. I can set up a trust for your brother's education, secure your mother's retirement. My net worth is vast, Clara. Anything you need, I can provide." His words, though well-intentioned, wounded her. "It was never about money," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "It was about healing, and the healing has happened. To stay now would be different." Desperation took over Arthur's face. He saw the world he had so carefully rebuilt about to crumble. He understood, in that moment, that all his gold, all his assets and liabilities were useless in the face of the loss he was about to suffer. He took a step forward, the space between them now electric. His hand rose as if to touch her face, but stopped in midair. His eyes, once shielded by a wall of pain and control, were now completely exposed, raw with an emotion he could no longer hide. "Then don't go," he said, his voice hoarse, broken. "Don't leave me. Because Leo's healing was just the beginning, and mine, my healing, Clara, it begins and ends with you." Arthur's confession hung in the office air, as fragile and as powerful as Leo's first word. Clara felt the impact of those words in every fiber of her being. His healing began and ended with her. It was the truth her heart recognized, but that her mind, shielded by fear, had never dared to admit. The millionaire before her was no longer the cold, calculating man who had hired her. The armor of wealth and power had disintegrated, revealing the man beneath, vulnerable, frightened, and, for the first time, completely honest. He didn't retreat after his confession. He remained there, his hands still suspended in the air between them, his gaze locked on hers, waiting for her verdict. In that silence, Clara saw her entire journey in that house, the groaning gate, the dead flowers, the closed door, the first petal touched, the first laugh. It had all led to this moment. Slowly, she raised her hand and met his. Their fingers intertwined, a touch that was both an answer and a promise. The relief that flooded Arthur's face was so profound, he seemed to sway. He pulled her gently toward him, and his arms enveloped her in a hug that was not paternal or protective. It was a hug of equals, of two souls who had found a home in each other. He buried his face in her hair, and Clara felt months of tension dissolve. "I thought loving again would be a betrayal of her memory," he whispered against her hair. "But now I understand. The heart isn't a vault with limited space. It expands. My love for Helena will always be here, but she taught me how to recognize the light when I saw it again. And you, Clara, You are all light. The next morning, a new order was established. The first thing Arthur did was summon Elvira to his office. Clara waited outside, not out of distrust, but to offer silent support. The conversation was brief. Arthur didn't yell. His voice was calm, firm, and final. Your services are no longer required, Elvira. Your severance and a letter of reference, which will mention only your years of competent service before your act of malice, will be ready by noon. Elvira tried to argue, to appeal to her past loyalty, but Arthur cut her off. Loyalty that uses lies to hurt others isn't loyalty. It's poison. You've poisoned this house for long enough. For the first time, Clara saw Elvira completely stripped of her arrogance. She left the office a diminished figure, the embodiment of a dark past that was finally being left behind. Later that day, as the afternoon sun warmed the garden, Arthur and Clara sat on the stone bench, holding hands, watching Leo. The boy ran up to them, holding a small yellow flower. He glanced at their intertwined hands, a childlike curiosity in his eyes. Then, with the pure simplicity of children, he placed the yellow flower on top of their joined hands like a blessing. He smiled, a smile that said that, to him, this was the most natural thing in the world. The arc of suffering had been completed, giving way to overcoming. The conflicts that had kept them apart, Arthur's guilt, Clara's fear, Leo's silence, had been resolved. Not with hasty solutions, but with the slow, patient gardening of affection. They didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time, they weren't afraid to find out. Together, the three of them walked to an empty patch of soil. Arthur carried a small oak sapling, a tree that would take generations to grow strong. They knelt in the dirt, the billionaire, the nanny, and the boy, and with their hands together, they planted the promise of their future, a future whose roots would be nourished not by fortune or capital, but by the fertile ground of rediscovered love. The white gate of the seaside mansion no longer groaned. Oiled and cared for, it now opened smoothly, as if the house itself had learned to breathe again. The silence, once a shroud covering every room, had been replaced by the soundtrack of life. Leo's voice, asking ceaseless questions about the clouds. The clink of silverware on plates during a shared breakfast, and laughter, a sound that had become as common as the sea breeze. The marble hallways, once cold and empty, were now racetracks for Leo's toy cars and often displayed the boy's artwork. Colorful drawings of flowers and smiling suns taped up at a height his own eyes could admire. This was no longer the mansion of a reclusive millionaire. It was a home. The most profound transformation, however, was Arthur's. He was still a brilliant architect and a shrewd businessman, his net worth continuing to grow through sound investments and deals. But fortune was no longer the center of his existence. One afternoon, he was in his office, ending a video call with European investors who were congratulating him on the extraordinary returns from one of his funds. Years ago, such news would have filled him with a cold pride and driven him to chase the next big profit. Now, he simply thanked them politely, ended the call, and his gaze drifted from the monitor displaying stock charts to a small piece of paper taped beside it. It was a drawing from Leo, 3 stick figures holding hands under a scribbled yellow sun. Below it, written with Clara's help, was the caption, "Daddy, Leo, and Clara." Arthur traced the drawing with his finger. He thought of all the years he had spent accumulating assets and capital, building a golden cage for himself. He had confused the price of things with their value. The greatest inheritance he would leave his son would not be a bank account overflowing with dollars, but the memory of a father who had learned how to be present. Clara entered the office, carrying 2 cups of tea. She stopped behind him and placed her hands on his shoulders. They needed no words. She could feel the peace emanating from him, a calm that hadn't existed when she first arrived. "I used to think my job was to build things that would last forever," he said, his voice low, looking at the drawing. "But I was wrong. My job is to build moments worth remembering." She leaned down and kissed the top of his head. "And you're the best builder I know." Later, as the sun began its lazy descent toward the sea, the three of them went to the garden. The small oak tree they had planted together stood firm in the earth, its small green leaves trembling in the wind. It was a symbol of their beginning, a promise of strength and growth. Leo ran ahead, chasing the last rays of light, his laughter mingling with the sound of the waves. Arthur and Clara watched him, hand in hand. The sea beyond reflected the warm colors of the sky, and for the first time, the vastness of the horizon didn't seem lonely. But full of possibility. Some encounters in life don't happen to save us from our shipwrecks, but to teach us how to build a new, stronger boat, one capable of navigating any sea. Looking at the man beside her and the boy running free on the grass, Clara knew they had built theirs, and it was the only treasure that truly mattered.